Okay. Hello, good morning. Thank you for coming. I know it's a morning time. We're starting a bit late because we were waiting for people. My name is Dr. Kudai Birgen. I'm the new lecturer at the UCLCs in Central Asian Politics and Society. I'm also studying protest art as a sociologist, not as an art historian. That's very important to note because there are a lot of art historians who disagree that sociologists can do that. And I'm very happy to chair this panel. We have quite a lot of very super exciting people. Two of them will be online, and we're going to start with Halyna in a moment. And then we also have a performance at the end with Alena Ledeneva downstairs. So the installation and the performance is going to be very much active part of this particular panel. Okay, so what do we mean by protest art? And it's actually a question I ask my students because I'm teaching on protest art, and one of the questions is all art really political? And what does it mean to be political as an artist? And how can we express our protest against injustices, illiberal systems, authoritarian rule, corruption, and what are the forces of dissent that art can flourish in the art space, essentially. So that's the question that we will be exploring together. And I'm very happy that we received a fantastic array of abstracts that hopefully will form a very, very good discussion. So our first panelist is, as I said, online, Halyna Bakhmatova. She's actually reporting from the frontline city of Kharkiv. So it's very important that we all stand with Ukraine. And Halyna, the floor is yours, please.
Hello. My name is Halyna. May I share my screen, my report in screen?
Yes, please.
Because I prepared now.
Now, yeah, we can see your screen.
Oh, you can't see. You can see?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Because I prepared a big report on 8 pages, but I haven't enough time to read all this report, so I will read only the main points, and it will be more easier for you hear my report and understand it if you can see this text. So the title of my report is very long: Informality of Cultural and Social Life as the Only Opportunity to Survive in the Frontline City Kherson, not Kharkiv, Kherson, for those who remained and for refugees. Kherson region, steppe and will, steppe and freedom. In Ukrainian, it calls Kherson steppe и воля. So, as introduction, how to overcome our powerlessness before the system, how to create our own powerful system of self-determination, individual and group. In Ukraine, a unique situation of unification has developed significantly. Individual and national, state and non-state, for example, NGO, all Ukrainian and local, city, villages, personal and social, systemic and informal, for the sake of the one great goal, one main Ukrainian purpose: independence of Ukraine in all senses, freedom, democracy, the rule of law and human rights, resistance, decolonization, away from Moscow, etc. The war with Russian fascists invaders is a real game changer. And in a split second, everything changed in our country, and especially in my city, Kherson, that had been occupied. I will talk about my city, unbreakable Kherson, about its unique Kherson cultural, intellectual underground, which gives us strength and joy to live in our hometown. It makes it easier for Kherson residents to realize the highest mission and the great meaning of our lives. So, by the very fact of our stay in Kherson, during all 4 years of this terrible war, its resident already plays the most important role in the life of Ukraine and fill out lives with sense and significance. We hold the front line in our city together with our soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine. We're defending Kherson from racists together with our soldiers with weapons and peaceful unarmed residents. By the very fact of our staying in the city under the bomb every day, 10 times every days and every night, with our bodies and open palms. And this is an incredibly rich existence. We are not surviving, we really live. So the main part consists of 9 theses, and I will tell you about just only name and very shortly about every this thesis. The first one, patterns of informal power, the invisible and immeasurable dimensions. It is unwritten rules and hidden practices from the beginning of Ukraine's independence that keep society together and mobilize our people. We have already experienced 2 historical miracles, definitely miracles. There are our 2 magically victorious Maidans, Euromaidan and Pomeranch Maidan, and currently indomitable popular resistance during the war. I will show you how this happens. Every my big thesis, big points, is subdivided into small points. So I will underline these points. It is the informal power, informal networks that shape cultural production in various genres in my unbreakable Kherson. Residents of the city Kherson, population of the country and city, inhabitants, citizens, inmates, created the Kherson people's informal, spontaneous self-government, definitely informal and definitely spontaneous. As the city's self-awareness, self-organization, local self-government, which united residents, raised our pre-war small but proud civil society to the highest level and formed the unique Kherson cultural underground. The next small point, informal indomitability, unbreakability. I can show thousands of photos and videos about invisible Kherson in which unarmed, defenseless people with empty hands and unprotected bodies, without bulletproof vest, without anything, stand and chant to the orcs, go home, Russian soldier, fascist and occupiers. Informal authorities create hubs in Kherson's people's spontaneous self-organization to unite society, to form a unique cultural underground. This definitely unique cultural event that already lived in Kherson during 4 years, during all this terrible war. At the end of the 4th year of the terrible war in Kherson, dozens of different cultural spaces in shelters and brightly blooming. These are our hubs, our points of invincibility. In Ukrainian, it calls punti nezlamnosti, unbreakability. They are actively operating underground in dungeons, in basements, where is a bright, colorful, eventful life, cultural, artistic, social, public, intellectual, emotional, creative. This is our newest Kherson cultural underground in a social cultural phenomenon. Invisibility is Skovoroda. I would like to say about it, about his philosophy of invisibility, because it concerning with our theme. And this philosophy has helped for us. His concept of 3 worlds, universe, man, and God, and 2 natures, one visible and second invisible nature. Visible nature is called creature, it means animals, and invisible means God, means human soul. Skovoroda considered happiness to be the most important for a person, which should be built on unshakable foundation, which is made up in invisibility, the second nature, and the third symbolic word. So Grigory Skovoroda, Ukrainian philosophy, concerning to our topic of this conference. And the last point in this first thesis, informal diversity of the cultural underground. And what does this underground means for us? What does all this just for us? And this means to live. And this means that we live. We don't survive, we do not experience, but we live our lives here on the front line, a life full of meaning, feeling and impressions, knowledge and learning, join useful deeds and help to our heroic defenders. We will preserve the life of our city with our lives, our warmth with our own daily breath. We protect the thin candle of the letter Y of Ukrainian language and the small light of the vibrant existence of the city of Kherson. The second thesis, Informal, deeply intervened, creating networks of support, collective resilience and joint action. Informal labor and support create clearly visible in the creative sectors of events in Kherson. And now I just very shortly read the titles of the next thesis. Informal spiritual intellectual decolonization, get out of Moscow, Kherson artists in various genres challenge traditional categorization, exploring themes of decolonization. But at the same time, we said and we create the different events about decolonization of ourselves, about decolonization of our mind, of our thoughts and our soils and our hearts. For example, a solo performance by one Kherson author, his name is Artur Sumarokov, is forced exile from the war, entitled The Occupation of the Self. And the photo, performance doors and slivers. I give these references and you can show all these events with text and with many, many photos. And also the gradual creation of the Museum of Resistance in Kherson. The name could be I'm Kherson, or Museum of the Liberation of Memory. Our community will decide. But the idea is such a museum is differently informal. And because ordinary people, active citizens, activists of non-government organization now create this museum. And a little theory, informal self-awareness, cult manifestos as a formalization on informality, spontaneity, loneliness, and community in various art projects. We know all these cult manifestos of for example, futurism, Dadaism, expressionism, impressionism, symbolism, and so on. And similarly, now all Kherson visual art events necessarily have their verbalized component, like a manifesto. The fourth thesis, lecture performance and the age of performative informality. In this thesis, I would say only one fact. Our Kherson local historical history museum used the traditionally published periodic scientific notes, like every state museum in any countries. This is a formal systemic requirements for the museum, but in 2023, our museum published non-scientific notes. especially and definitely non-scientific notes. It's informal event, informal book, informal magazine. The memories of all museum employees who survived the occupation of the Kherson and its liberation. And this collection of memories as a manifestation of systemic informality, like oxymoron, but this is the fact. Systemic informality on the part of the state museum institution was presented in an innovative exhibition in the museum dedicated to the occupation and deoccupation of our Kherson. The next thesis, secret art in the workplace. In this thesis, I have such unique, such interesting, such unusual example that I should read about this example more carefully. This is about informality in the workplace, but this workplace is one place of one Ukrainian soldier, a young guy from Kherson, and his workplace is the front line and in the trenches. But this Kherson young man, organized an informal event there about the philosophy of Stoicism right in the trenches. And wrote about it in the social networks, the photo evidence as follows. Now his post in Facebook. We discussed several letters to Lucilium Seneca in the trenches between battles. Can you imagine? Between battles? The result was a reflection on the extraordinary circumstances in which each of us, Ukrainian soldiers, but our own will, found ourselves. Also, these circumstances were created by the evil, hatred, and meanness of the orcs. We choose our place in the new conditions independently. Therefore, this discussion was dedicated to tempering the spirit, and the Stoics are our best helpers in this, in the front line, about how to be content with the necessary, striving for enough, working for more according Seneca, how to strengthen yourself. Well, I want to convey my admiration for those who were there, to return even for an hour to the world of meanings, thoughts, interpretations, and the depth of the worldview of people is priceless. A colleague's comments of this post. I simply cannot remove the smile from my face. You wouldn't be you if you hadn't done that. This guy is an ordinary Kherson citizen, active citizen. He's a leader of different non-government project organization. My sixth thesis, protest art and informality. Political or protest art often focuses on political crimes and illegalities. Now, maybe I haven't enough time, so just I read only the name of my points. People resistance as an informal need of life.
Halyna, you have about 2 minutes left. Just thanks.
Yes. Just only name of my points without any explanation. But I will send this text to you, and I can answer and explain on the questions. The people resistance as an informal need of life, our informal activities. Another situation is when the activities of informal forces incepted informal evil. This point about blood, about Soviet notion blood, and this is another story, and I can retell it. Informal power together with formal power in Kherson is the newest phenomenon, newest phenomenon of the next point. The seven thesis forms and contact of art of resistance as an informal force of the whole society and each person separately. Now, I just list for you several cultural events, informal events that has been organized in Kherson during only these 4 years during this war. The first exhibition in the theater in art hub, Ukrainian Soborna Nezalezhna, independent. The second event, informal cultural production, and the latest event of the chronology of is the exhibition Sky over the Kherson. The next event, informal creation of Museum of Resistance, 20 things from Kherson, UA. The next event, informal primitive art of the Ukrainian grandmother, art album and research book, Polina Raiko, Invisible. The fifth event, informal art practice garden. There are various artistic practices that can be implemented in the basis of botanic gardens, parks, and natural environment. The sixth event, informal self-analysis, other landscape. The seventh event, informal resilience and street gallery afloat, 2023. The next project, New Kherson needs, it means newborn babies that was born in Kherson during these 4 years of war. The ninth event, informal chronic of the Vyshyvanka. It means diary and Vyshyvanka from one Kherson woman. Informal adaptation, this project about how Kherson people have to adapt to war, to occupation, and now to live under the bombing. And 11th event, informal visual art with a collage and performance exhibition, Kherson from inside and outside. So 11 big cultural events was organized in Kherson and in different cities in Ukraine, only this last 4 years during this war.
We're really running out of time. Do you want to conclude?
Yes, conclude. This is about values, which we stand up. And the next values about informal personal decision, choice for the sake such a general formal system, about decision of one person. And as a conclusion, that's all.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, because we have the text, we will distribute it among the participants. I can reach out to you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, though, and I'm really apologizing for mixing up the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Invite Mahi Shah to the floor with making the room the politics of space and affect in contemporary Cuban art.
Do you have a clip? So my paper today examines how contemporary Cuban artists curate the domestic space to make room for an alternative cultural archive. So just to start with some context, Cuba is a country fraught with obstacles that has endured and continues to endure periods of political turbulence and socioeconomic crisis. But I'd like to zoom into 2018, which is the year that current President Miguel Díaz-Canel proposed Decree 349, which catalyzed and mobilized manifestations of cultural dissent that have transpired over recent years. Decree 349 provided that all artists were to be prohibited from operating in private or public spaces without approval by the Ministry of Culture. Cuban artist Leandro Feao and curator Abel González Fernández produced a documentary series in 2019 to 2020. Am I pressing this? Sorry. That. Sorry. Oh. A documentary series called Sin 349, so without the decree, where they interviewed various cultural representatives. So that's a group of them. Feao confirmed the success of the pressure from the cultural community, describing Decree 349 as congelado, frozen. The legacies of the decree's attempted enforcement do, however, remain, as contemporary Cuban artists are in a state of heightened hyper-awareness as to the precarity of freedom of expression, the lengths to which the regime will go, and the significance of vocalizing dissentful resistance. Indeed, as these artists explore informal cultural networks and practices, they find interstices within the contemporary political regime of space, in order to access and negotiate the conditions for dissent as a form of informal protest, aesthetic survival, and effective intimacy. One of the most enduring manifestations of this negotiation can be traced to the cultural space Espacio Aglutinador, Cuba's longest-running, though currently closed, independent art space, founded in 1994 by Sandra Ceballos and Ezequiel Suarez in Sandra's home. Suarez had just had his artwork censored by cultural officials in another gallery space, and the couple removed and reinstalled them in Sandra's home. Artist Hamlet Labastida describes the space as a house that was outside of the control of the cultural state, and also the first non-institutional space outside the Cuban institutional cultural system. Two exhibits demonstrating, so these are pictures of the house space. Then if you could go to the next, please. So two exhibits demonstrating the space's existence as outside state cultural structures were the 2008 Curadores Go Home, so curators go home, and then the three-part exhibit series, Curadores Come Home 5 years later. The former invited artists to exhibit works of their choice, wherever they wanted to display them. Artists were able to write the names of works and exhibits that had been censored, as well as those responsible for censoring them. As the former exhibit dislocated the curator to introduce a new layer to cultural freedom, the latter privileged curatorial power, as artists' names were eradicated to reframe cultural reception. In my interview with Ceballos, she shared how these dialogic exhibits proposed a model of democracy, inviting us to consider the wider socio-political function of alternative cultural spaces. Another artist, Coco Fusco, describes Ceballos' desire to aglutinar, that is, to bring everybody together, which emphasizes the space's capacity to connect a civic and cultural network. The space functioned as what Miriam Hansen terms, an alternative public sphere, by providing an intersubjective horizon through and against which particular social groups could negotiate the specific displacements and discrepancies of their experience. Beyond the moments of communication that existed within the spatial temporal sphere of the space, I look at the effective legacies of this desire to aglutinar. The symbolic particularity of this alternative space transcends its physical bounds, affecting contemporary artists through their encounters with those who have passed through the space, the artworks that continue to embody the space's dissenting cultural value, and current spaces that show glimpses of this historic community. We might ask, can agglutinating processes of sociocultural, transtemporal, and affective adhesion translate paradoxically to a model of community that celebrates the degglutinating characteristics of dissent? So 2024 marked 30 years since Espacio Aglutinador's inauguration in the Cuban art world, yet comparable cultural spaces that have taken root in the home are few and far between. In 2024, artist Leandro Freao invited me to a private exhibit at Suarez's new apartment featuring artist Alejandro Ulloa. So that's the invite that was circulated on WhatsApp. Suarez's invite-only policy attracted an eclectic, interdisciplinary crowd, creating an intimate space that sought to avoid an official or state audience, in his words. The domestic space functioned as a counter-institutional infrastructure, embracing informality and oscillating between cultural visibility and strategic invisibility. Energized by, could you please, thank you. Energized by bursts of blue and red light strobes, booming music, and bottles of rum, these personalities mingled and collided in this fleeting democratic zone, chatting about art, politics, sex, and punk music. So, on the next slide, this is the primary wall in the apartment, framing 3 cuadros, which in Spanish means both painting and government official. So the main one captures an official's ingestion, so a state official's ingestion of a lobster. Destabilizing the distinction between the consumed and consumer, Ulloa captures the metamorphosis that happens to those under systems of power as positions of subjecthood are eroded. The excess of power, symbolized by the lobster, is all-consuming, implicating the consumer in a destructive process of indigestion. It explodes outwards, fracturing the body as its tentacles pierce through the official's veins. corporeal intermingling that references the inability to identify where power begins and where it can be distinguished from the subject. During my interview with him later, he expressed his aversion to exhibiting in state cultural institutions, identifying a system that had failed, failing to both engage the audience for which his artworks are intended and to integrate self-taught artists like himself. He described Suarez's home as a space of freedom in all senses. George Perec describes how we employ doors as a barrier to protect ourselves. We barricade ourselves in. In doing so, we create two spheres. On one side, me and my place, the private, the domestic. On the other side, the other people, the world, the public, politics. In the home art space, the intimacy of my place disintegrates into the shared intimacy of Hanson's alternative public sphere, resonating with Lauren Berlant's observation that the inwardness of the intimate is met by a corresponding publicness. Whereas cultural officials in state-sanctioned spaces might restrict or prescribe models of effective movement, Suarez's home, albeit contained within the domestic space, was not spatially constricted. The assemblage of culturally produced affects expanded the space through movement itself, witnessing how intimacy became a publicly shared experience. In Chantal Mouffe's conclusion to her proposal for an agonistic plurality, she writes that to make room for dissent and to foster the institution in which it can be manifested is vital for a pluralist democracy. Although Suarez's home was neither attempting to become a long-standing cultural fixture, nor was it open to exhibiting a far-reaching selection of artists, its sense of ideological freedom paralleled the atmosphere of Ceballos' home. In present-day Cuba, Espacio Aglutinador is a forceful referent for vernacular cultural democracy. Its legacy establishes cultural presence in spite of its functional absence, moving artist bodies as they envision democratic moments of cultural engagement that surpass institutional structures. Perec encourages us, in the case of a new building, try to remember what was there before. In analysing the shared aesthetic experience of Ulloa's exhibit in Suarez's home, we must remember how Espacio Aglutinador first made and continues to make room for cultural manifestations of a pluralist democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mahi. I should have done better introduction. Mahi was a student in MML, Modern and Medieval Languages in Spanish, at the University of Cambridge. And next we have Clara Cheung, who's a Hong Kong-based artist and curator, known for co-founding the influential CNG Apartment, a Hong Kong art space that focuses on local art ecology, social issues, and artistic exchange. Now she's based in the UK, where she, along with her partner, is working on a very important project, community project called Harcourt Road, and she'll be presenting on that. Thank you.
Because I have quite a number of slides, but just want to show you more the visual, not going to explain everything in detail. Let's see how it works. Okay. Yeah, so this is the project. Oops. Next. Okay, next. Right. Okay. Okay. So a bit of the background and context before we jump into the Harcourt Road project. So you probably have heard of Hong Kong, and this. It was a British colony, and now has been handed over from Britain to China, but maybe not many people are really aware of all the political context. So one really important fact is that we did not vote. We did not have a chance to vote. No referendum for self-determination. I think it was a term our first speaker also used a while ago, talking about Ukrainian situation. So I think we deserve it. But so this is the situation. In 2007, when my partner and I, we started an alternative art space in Hong Kong, we were thinking about then what do we want to do. At that moment, that's 10 years after the so-called handover, we started the art space, and then at that moment we were thinking about what's going on, because 10 years ago we saw a lot of sort of political art, basically Hong Kong artists exploring our cultural identities, and it was really widely reported because that was the political issue. 1997, the handover happened, then the mass media, like art magazines, international art magazines also wanted to cover it. And then all of a sudden, after 1997, July 1st, nothing like that would be reported anymore. So my question was, did we gone okay? We just found the Hong Konger cultural identity all of a sudden, decolonization finished? Or it's just that we don't have the space to visualize what's going on, but the artists probably were still working on it. So we were like, let's try to provide a space in our own capacity to let more of this kind of artwork to be shown. And then later on, 2014, we had a really mass social movement in Hong Kong. The slogan was like, I want the we want our right to vote for our own governor. Yeah, and then I think in that slogan, I, as the self-identity, was really important. And then in 2019, the slogan went further to liberate Hong Kong, and is a revolution of our time. But unfortunately, we failed this time. And then, of course, in between, there were also other protests. But we have not succeeded yet. And at the moment, in 2026 nowadays, basically, my friends in Hong Kong, basically, if they want to advocate, they will be silenced and sent to jail. I mean, you all are probably really familiar with what it is, comparing with a situation in East Europe, for example. Next. Sorry, okay, I just pretend to click. Then I just pretend to click. Then it would be make it easier. So long story short, my partner and I moved our art space to Sheffield in 2020. Well, we moved ourselves in 2021 in exile, and then we reopened the space in 2024. We hope to make use of this space in Sheffield to sort of continue the advocacy work. And when we arrived at Sheffield, we saw the street name, Harcourt, and it just struck us because in Hong Kong, we also have a Harcourt Road. And of course, because of the colonial history, we also have a lot of many other streets with the same name. But Harcourt was important because it was next to the new government headquarters since around 2008 in Hong Kong, and basically all the protests would pass by, and we occupied Harcourt Road in 2014 as a mass Occupy movement to advocate for the universal suffrage. Click. So just like you see the image, Harcourt, but we also have the Chinese character, of course. Click. Because of that, we wanted to do something about it because it just it's in the body memories. I think you know what I mean. So we really want to do something about it. But what? We want to explore more about the stories on Harcourt in Sheffield and Hong Kong, but we didn't really know where we can go because it's actually a small street in Sheffield with a lot of residential area. So we started by just having an exhibition first, with some of our paintings, talking about our memories of the Hong Kong's Harcourt. And so I also painted some really colorful banners to call for stories, to see if we can attract some locals to talk to us. And then we invite people to the exhibition to tell us more about their memories, either about Hong Kong's Harcourt Road or Sheffield's Harcourt. And then we did some other community activity, like go to the park next to the Sheffield's Harcourt to do outdoor painting together. Because we do think situating yourself in the site can recall different kinds of memories as well. We did a sound walk with different audience. So we interviewed some residents on the Sheffield's Harcourt Road about their community organizing experiences there. And then we intertwined those interviews with some sound recorded in 2014 around Harcourt Road by Hong Kong artists at that time. So we just let people to walk quietly, but experience different time and space at the same time. And then we did some drawing after the sound walk. We also invite people to go to the local library to check out the really old maps with us, to make ties together with the drawings after sound walk. So later on, so after all these community activities, we decided that we are ready, because we have been collecting more and more stories about Sheffield's Harcourt Road and also Hong Kong people's memory of their Harcourt Road in Hong Kong. So we set up a mobile museum, basically. Try to rewrite the code of the public space, memory, and belonging. With the mobile museum, basically it's a small box with different objects. I will show you a few for example later on. And then we put it on an e-bike and then just go around in the area, in the city, to encounter people. So it was really beautiful because we were really lucky to be able to meet really lovely like residents in Sheffield's Harcourt Road. For example, one resident actually contributed a jam made with the blackberry at the end of the road. Like it just grew wildly by itself because of an undeveloped piece of land next to their neighborhood. And the recipe is actually, the title of the recipe is about the Harcourt Hole, the undeveloped piece of land, meeting Tennessee blackberry jam, because she's from Tennessee, yeah. And so you can also see different stories. And we also look into how community organizing happened in Sheffield's Harcourt. Later on, we put the mobile museum in an exhibition space with a timeline, basically comparing the political history of Sheffield and Hong Kong. But more importantly, so just like you see some of these visual, so all of these basically were shown in the exhibition, and also you can find it online. I think, but really interestingly, when we talk to people in Sheffield, we ask them, so about community organizing, what do you do? These are the activities they do. They dance, they draw, and they clean the street together. And I was recalling what we do when we occupy Hong Kong's Harcourt Road, basically the same. So in the Occupy movement in Hong Kong, we do really similar activities. So I was really drawing a lot of the parallels about how people come together. And ultimately, if Hong Kong people can liberate ourselves, maybe this is the community ideal is still, what we really hope to have. So this is really worth to share more with other people. So just more objects that we exhibit in the exhibition for your reference. But it was really a nice way to sort of introduce the Hong Kong people new to Sheffield to the people in Sheffield, and to also draw the parallel histories together. Just last point is that at the opening of the exhibition, we invited musicians from Sheffield to play Glory to Hong Kong with their musical instrument, because this is a song banned by China and you can no longer find it online, but we find it with the human in prisons, you can share the music with your own body. So we can sort of, come across this censorship issue. So, last, we discovered some stories about how the community all together fighting for more than 10 years to get a traffic light set up. It may seem really trivial, but I think in this case, we want to emphasize how really trivial small things you do for the community actually matters, and we should celebrate it, because something like this, if we accumulate, later on, you do form your own community and solidarity together. So I think, that's the end. And can I go really quickly to the last slide? Oh yeah, and then we also put the documentation of the whole project at the Sheffield's archives, and we really appreciate it, because this is, at the moment, sort of some space we can find to document Hong Kong people's memories, because these memories cannot be stored in Hong Kong at the moment. So, but we do hope that we can have the space to have our own People's History Museum in Hong Kong in the future. So these are some of the questions I had when I was working on the project. And welcome to check out the website, and yeah, look forward to more discussion later on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clara. Okay, our next speaker is CIS's very own PhD student, Natalija Stepanović, who is working on in researching queer literatures in Balkans, and is working on the PhD thesis called A History of Serbian and Croatian LGBT Prose. So, Natalija, the floor is yours.
Oh, okay, great. So what I wanted to share with you about is the beginnings of my next project. So after I wrap up my doctorate, I would like to do more about the working class cultures and belonging as a working class academic, basically, and the ways in which that experience is transported into the global art. And this is one of the junct factories around my home region of Dalmatia in Croatia. So we can see kind of things falling apart, and I'm trying to think about what we can build based on that. My presentation is called Poor Boy, Big Plans, Informal Protocols of Belonging in Contemporary Queer Writing. So if we can see the next slide, I can provide a little bit of the background and theoretical backing for my approach. So basically, what is the main happy ending in queer literature, right? It's going to the big city and becoming a famous artist. And we see that in numbers of narratives, we see that across the genres. But in the working class literature, even when the queer protagonist gets there finally, he usually, or she or they, are kind of at odds with the things they find there, and they encounter these obscure scripts, kind of protocols of belonging that they have to do in order to do the bit of being an intellectual or being an artist in a metropolis. So that's the main tension within what I'm talking about now. And the other thing is, well, there is another script that is more sinister, and it's not necessarily a happy sort of belonging, and that is the case of meritocracy needing some poster children, even though we kind of know that not a lot of working class people even get very far. Like, a few of them need to pull through in order for the system to depict itself, neoliberal capitalism, as just. So somebody needs to kind of step up as an underdog, and you kind of just hope that it will work out for you. But it also comes with some constraints, obviously. And even though I might have submitted a typo in the printed program, it says poor body, but part of doing the bit is kind of adjusting your body to this script. So things like having good teeth or having low BMI are part of it. So it's not only about acting, but also embodying the part. And this is maybe the most famous underdog when it comes to working class literature and culture in the UK. So it's From Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, the BBC version of the book. And what is interesting about it, that it's a story about a working class lesbian from this industrial town who has a very homophobic religious family. And in the BBC version, even the people who ideologically agree with her parents sided with her. So we can see how compelling the story of the underdog is. But this is not necessarily a queer thing, like even a Rocky training montage. It's the same story about the underdog. Nobody roots for the guys Rocky is punching, obviously. So this is your best bet if you are a working class person. So when it comes to more theoretical way to think about these things, I wanted to outline two sorts of belonging. The first is the big picture, and then how it looks like from down below. So I wanted to mention the New International, which is Derrida's concept from the Spectres of Marx. And he's writing about grouping together outside of states and parties. So it's kind of very vague, but taking upon the leftovers of socialism that we see present throughout working class literature, especially in Yugoslav working class literature that had a lived experience of state socialism, right? But he's saying that we should reattempt basically kind of bonding together on a global scale. And that's why I bring together two French examples and two Croatian ones to underline this kind of global togetherness. But there is an alternative order. So the New International is about thinking the future, but the current situation is more hierarchical. So there are a few ways about thinking queerness in a global sense. I have listed some of the theories. Metropolitan gayness means basically that the US is the main maker of the gay culture, or they used to be until recently. Homonationalism means that we need to cling to being a patriot in order to become a citizen and kind of trade in to be accepted. And homocapitalism means that we are not invited to join the mainstream as citizens through human rights, but as consumers through our monetary powers. So these are various things that help us to position working class people who live in France, that is kind of the center, and then in Croatia, that is European periphery. So when it comes to belonging from below, a lot of working class narratives, there is a question whether they are really narratives. So a lot of working class literature, I mean, it took a while for working class people to even be featured in literature. It was a fairly recent thing. And a lot of time depicted there is poorly structured in a sense that working a shift job or being a teenage parent or living a short life because your body got busted while you worked in a factory doesn't really align with normative life trajectories at all. So there are a lot of genre strains that come when it comes to featuring a working class person as a protagonist rather than a middle class one, even if it's a queer narration. So if we can switch to the next slide. So now I want to go through some of the examples, and I have picked 4 books that are available in English just in case you want to check them out. The first one is The End of Eddie. It's a book by Edouard Louis about this boy called Eddie who lives in an industrial village in France, and he's bullied, and then he gets to a better high school and eventually gets to Paris. But what is interesting about him is both that he needs to reroute his body into belonging by saying that he has bad teeth, not because he's poor, but because his parents are bohemians, so they don't care about getting him braces because they cared about otherworldly pursuits. So we can see a very strange full circle that the rich start resembling the poor. You need to reroute yourself into alternative narrative. And what is also interesting about him is when he comes to this better high school, right, he sees a lot of boys who, for him, act like queers. So they have soft bodies, they kiss each other's cheeks upon greeting, and he thinks of them as queers, but they are not, they are just upper class, and then he still encounters homophobia, even though it's supposed to be his rescue from the poor surroundings into the better life, but it's not really. So it's about two different systems of discrimination that kind of structure his coming of age. And then Eddie changes his name to Edouard Louis, and he comes to Paris, and he meets Didier Ribon, who is this older writer, already an academic, who structured his entire body of work around gayness and gay self as created by the insult. But all along, he was hiding that he came from another industrial town, and he was also a working class boy. So 2 of them kind of bonded. They probably trauma dumped like crazy. And then Edouard writes The End of Eddie with Didier as an inspiration, basically. So what is interesting about Returning to Reims is a story about, well, already an established intellectual who has lived most of his adult life as a cultured person, as he says. And then he kind of returns to Reims, which is his industrial town in France when he grew up. So he was all along, while being openly gay, he was hiding that he was a working class person. And he writes a lot about painful performativity and how he had to learn to get informal with others. And he needed to supervise himself to kind of start speaking in a proper manner, to appear cultured, to appear not bored when he's listening to classical music, which is a hard task. So there is a lot that goes into it. And if we can switch to the next slide and kind of close with a quote. So this is about Eddie coming to a better high school and still getting called a slur. So it didn't really necessarily get better for him, but it did change. So if we can switch to the last one. So this is basically from my dissertation because I'm studying Serbian and Croatian prose, right? So these are two examples that also feature working class children, and we can see the gender division because I wanted to say poor boy, big plans because upward mobility is a boy story, but for a girl it's usually a big wedding. So if you're a working class woman, your best bet is to marry into money. And a lot of narratives do portray that. So the first example is called The Daddy Issues. It's about this poet who works in a hotel. He kind of observes the guest, doesn't do much during his shifts. And we learned that he has spent some time in Berlin, but he was too poor to stay there. And he's from another industrial town, Sisak, that had a big industry during socialist Yugoslavia, but is now basically a junkyard. And he does get some sort of agency through becoming an author, but he needs to navigate a lot of spaces that belong to the middle class. So he needs to kind of get friends in art, friends with kids, and a lot of queer belonging is negotiated through marriage and parenthood, which is obviously not really accessible for everybody. I mean, children are expensive. But he also starts to identify with construction workers whom he sees working on the streets and getting their backs broken through this hard labor. So he does kind of pass between different spaces. And the final example is called Faraway Cowboy. It's a novel set in my hometown, Split. So it's about this girl who is a failed student. She comes back to Split to find out why her brother killed himself. And there is a lot to her queerness. She doesn't do anything. She literally has no job, and nobody else around her has any sort of occupation. So she is going to Berlin, but not to become an artist, but to work in a fast food joint. And she is currently in Split. Her claim on agency is not becoming a writer, but becoming a character. So she meets Olya, the writer of the novel, in the train. But I think that she makes a better attempt at the New International, the concept we started with, because when she walks through Split, she meets a lot of people like teenage parents, people who suffer from mental illnesses, just rejects and outcasts, and she genuinely forms a connection with them. So I feel like there is a better claim on agency in this novel, even though good things really do not happen. Okay, that's all. Thank you. Sorry for depressing. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Anastasia Korableva, who is a multidisciplinary creative professional and researcher specializing in urban art. Thank you. And protest culture and creative propaganda in non-democratic societies. Anastasia is based at the University of Sussex and explores... sorry, oh my God. I had a bike accident this morning, so I'm sorry that I'm confusing things today. But Anastasia explores how art intersects with power, space and collective memory in repressive political settings, and is working on Russia. So let's hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing me. Hi, everyone. So, yeah, basically, the most important comment has been voiced already. The authoritarian space in question is going to be Russia. Can we? I will. Oh, wow, yeah. So, to make sure we're on the same page, let us start by defining the concepts. So, there are many approaches to reading street art. I'm siding with those who say that street art is an illegal or unauthorized or... okay, I'm just afraid that I'm going to scream to you because... oh, thank you. Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, unauthorized, illegal, unsanctioned, choose the word you like. Creative activity which takes place in urban space and is aimed at the general audience. That's important because people usually confuse street art and graffiti. And graffiti is a subculture activity, so it's for other graffiti writers. Street art is for everyone, ideally, very democratic. And poetic street art can be seen as a genre within street art. And it's not my idea. The term was coined by Russian street artist Timofey Radyan from Yekaterinburg. He actually distinguishes between poetic street art and political street art. He doesn't really provide any clear definition, but from what I observed, political street art is about making direct claims. It's about calling for action, it's about meaningful change, whereas poetic street art is about your intimate experiences, your feelings. It's lyrical, it's philosophical, it's existential, it's anything but political, but the two are not antagonistic, and we will see that in a minute. But in my opinion, the poetic can also be defined as having to do with language. Many researchers say that Russia is literature-based culture, which means that the written word has the, what do you call that? The privilege of being like the sun around which all other forms of art are revolving. And we also see that in street art, because in Russia, text-based street art is extremely common. That said, poetic street art can be any form. It can be an image, it can be a dance, it can be whatever, but for the sake of clarity, we're focusing on text today. So, how is it working? How this poetry works? Basically, we need to keep in mind that authoritarian space in Russia is linguocratic. Mikhail Epstein says that Russia is all about controlling the language. It's about controlling who can say, what they can say, and where they can say. And ultimately, it's about constructing a pseudo-reality based on language. So my basic idea of the whole presentation is that poetic street art, maybe it's not about immediate change, but it's about reclaiming the very right for meaning making. And we clearly see that when poetic street art is put in context. So this work alone is, funny, quirky, absurd, but not political perhaps. But when we compare it to propaganda and state-backed murals and other artworks, because there is now a rise of propaganda murals in Russia. So when we compare the two, we can see that actually poetic street art acquires political meaning. Sorry. Yay. For those of you who at this point missed some good academic framework, here you go, this slide is for you. So when studying street art, and poetic street art in particular, I was particularly inspired by two major theorists working with language and art. It's first of all Jacques Rancière and his work Distribution of the Sensible. In essence, he says that we live in a social order which is organized through the police. And the police are not men in the uniform. It's all this system of written, but mostly unwritten rules that make us assume certain roles, that prescribe behaviors, and that make us be good, rightful citizens. So my idea is that we all take this for granted. We think it's natural until something disrupts this order and we start to question, oh, is it really natural? So this is my idea what street art, poetic street art does. Second, of course, Mikhail Bakhtin and his idea of dialogue and carnival. Perhaps you already know that authoritarian spaces are often called monological spaces because they are about one narrative, top to bottom. It's not about anyone responding, it's about everyone assuming this narrative and being happy living in this linguocracy. So poetic street art opens the space for dialogue because it initiates engagement. And we can see it here. I love this work, an only one. A St. Petersburg artist, Agan Noga, wrote, "Hi everyone, I'm a fatalist," and someone immediately wrote under that, "And I'm a metalhead, a metalist." So poetic street art is open for dialogue, and it's important, but because it's so what I call apragmatic, so not about practical change this very moment, it's also often absurd. And because of its absurdity, it actually manages to subvert hierarchies. So ultimately, the very idea is that poetic street art makes dominant framings of linguocracy perceptible. And once we can see them, and we can deal with them, we can question them, we can challenge them, and we can possibly overthrow them. So I really wanted to save you time, so here are my conclusions. So poetic street art still can have a political effect, even if it's not about evoking any action. It's about granting you the agency. It's about your right to free speech and to meaning-making, and this agency is actually quite disruptive if we think about authoritarian contexts, because what they are afraid of is that people start to understand that they can think for themselves, they can decide for themselves. So where we can imagine better futures, where we can imagine alternative futures, agency emerges. And this is what is very subversive for an authoritarian state like present-day Russia. That's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you. And thank you so much for keeping with the time. We only have 2 more presentations, one of which will be also performative. Yes.
Should I wait a little bit for that?
Let me do a brief introduction. Hoye is working on the Hong Kong social movement that is looking into fostering pro-democracy values and identity and examining the extent to which visual imagery reflects and shapes the identity of Hong Kongers. I think you finished your PhD already, but...
Okay, let me quickly start. Hello, everyone. It was great to hear all the presentations, very inspiring, especially Clara's one, because I think my presentation will resonate with hers a little bit and give you another perspective, not some more, but one more perspectives about what happened in Hong Kong during the social movement. So let's go for the second slide. To get started, I want you to just a few seconds in your head guess the caption of this photo. This photo was published on pro-China, pro-government newspaper outlet called One Way Pao in Hong Kong, and it was taken in July 2019. Wild guess what you think, how they would describe what's going on in this photo. And the answer I can give you is that in the captions, they said there's a rioters damaging the entrance of the liaison office of the Central People's Government in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. So yeah, as you can see, how much damage they might be doing to the entrance. They call this rioters. And when I was comparing this image and the caption, it actually made me think about that protest art, including photographic images, is a crucial medium for protesters to expose state violence, of course, but also for the state and its media to produce negative narratives about the anti-authoritarian protesters. So today, through this very short presentation, I will show you a few examples related to the visual language used by the artist-protesters to contest these state narratives by generating a kind of iconoclash tension. Give you a very brief introduction about the context. In 2019 and 2020, Hong Kong had is largest social movement in history, the anti-extradition bill movement, with more than 2 million people marching, protesting against the extradition bill proposed by the government. The bill granting authorities to other governments, including the main Chinese government, to extradite criminals from Hong Kong. The fear was that this bill could be used to extradite possibly political descendants disagreeing with the policies of the Chinese Communist Party. So it was therefore seen as the most serious threat to the city's autonomy and freedom of speech and expression. So the constant clashes during this movement between the protesters and the police force was one of the main themes, actually, for the movement's visual production. In addition to marching and protesting, visual production was the key means that protesters used to expose the state violence against unarmed protesters. Through social media and encrypted platforms such as Telegram, artist-protesters create images to depict the brutalities of the police, the refusal to safeguard non-violent citizens, and their alleged collaboration with non-state actors, especially organized gangs. This poster is an example. On the left, as you can see, there's a policeman trying to hit the protester with his baton. And the slogan said in Cantonese, "I'm not afraid of anything. I beat whoever I want to beat." The title here on the right, you can see, is posing a question. Hong Kong police, no fear, no bias, no ill will. So with the fears on the protester faces on the right, this visual reiterations of a photo captured during the police protester clash generates a kind of tensions, as Bruno Latour described in his concepts of iconoclash. Latour defines an iconoclash as what happens when there is uncertainty about whether one is faced with the destruction of an image or the construction of a new one. So there are plenty of images produced during the movement. However, based on my research, I think we cannot just take them as pure documentary records of the events. This, in contrast to the poster, these images, in contrast to the poster created by the protester in the previous slides, was disseminated in mass media, mainstream mass media, especially the pro-China and pro-government newspaper outlets like Wanwei Pao and Taigong Pao. We can find these images of the police force, particularly these two, as you can see. They look like they're very disciplined, line up, arresting the protester without any excessive use of violence. And the pro-government media, apart from showing the images showing how disciplined the police force was, they took another step as well, not just whitewashing that about their violence, action, and abuse of power. And this image on the left, claiming to be created by the silenced majority of Hong Kong. To be honest, no one ever know who are this so-called silent majority. They just claim themselves to be the silent majority of Hong Kong. The text on this poster said the rioters wearing black were pretending to be policemen by buying fake police uniform from online platform like Taobao. So whoever wearing a police uniform without an officer identification pass would be a fake policeman pretended by a protester. That's what they claim. Meanwhile, on the right, and you see this very simple collage, shows that throughout the movement, there were a large number of video recordings showing that the police force stopped displaying their officers' identification passes and refusing to tell anyone their officers' identification numbers. So no one can report them to the independent office for police conduct and identify them for putting charges against their violent actions. So that's why, in contrast to the image on the left, the protesters create this kind of collage to show police actually in full gear, having handwritten pieces of paper, just random white paper with a so-called police identification numbers instead of having their official officers' identification passes. The differences between these two images demonstrate how the protesters made use of images as a tool of resistance and sometimes as an effective vehicle of solidarity. The last example I want to show you is this one. So suddenly the protesters try to break the image of the police force as the righteous defenders of law and order. The image like this one shows how the Hong Kong movement's visual images represents the protesters' refusals of erasures and testimony to the experience of abuse. On the left is the one that is distributed by the pro-government, pro-China newspaper outlet, One Way Power again, with the captions saying that a policeman was trying to stop riotous violence actions with his gun. But I think it's obvious if you have a good look of the gun, this is not a usual gun used by a police officer. This is a shotgun, which is a complete excessive use of force against the protesters, which were largely unarmed, or the best they can have may be just a pot from home to stop the tear gas from emitting and getting into the breathing systems. So this image on the right created by the protester specified the weapons, saying that the policeman pointed a shotgun at civilians multiple times. So this is not just one particular moment. This policeman has pointed a shotgun at civilians. As you can see, the other people around them, they're just taking pictures, they're having umbrellas, they don't even have any protective gears with them. But this policeman is using a shotgun pointing at people around him. This comparison of the state-controlled image against the artist-protester image reveals protest visual production as a field of context visibility in which collective creativity mobilizes visual languages out of political necessity and affective urgency. So as a conclusion, I think these images show that the visual language narrating the police brutality in the Hong Kong social movement represents the role of informal art in creating a kind of iconoclastic clashes between different visual regimes. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Hoya. Thank you. And now I invite our, yes, thank you. This is for you. I invite our in-person audience downstairs for the performance and presentation by Professor Alena Ledeneva from the UCLCs, who is a professor in politics and society and also an artist. So we will see her performance and hear all about her installation. Take the mic as well. We're going downstairs to the bookshop and there will be transmission to the Zoom.
Something that really has bothered me for a long time, from my very childhood, when I first experienced the pressure of the system. The system made me do it. And actually here you put two artifacts from my personal social on the system made me do it. And I try to abstract the patterns, like what is it within the systems that made us be how we are. So I'll do a little performance and Denise has kindly agreed to help me with that. And not now, I mean, but the idea has been to actually look carefully at Russia because come from and I better understood how the system operates and pressurizes us in behaving informally, trying to circumvent. And a lot of this conference have actually addressed informality as being a response to the failure of the systems. When formal institutions do not work, what we do So in a way, what you see there in the notes are patterns that we've abstracted first in art and then in music, composed to represent the patterns. And there are handouts. I'm not going to spend time. Handouts that describe the patterns of Sistema. I think they're on the other side. There are also postcards if you want to take away. But this one is the work that represents what we've spoken in the panel today about the protest art. Because the way the systems operate, they try to sensitize you to read signals early. And if you read a signal early, nothing bad is going to happen to you. And now maybe, David, I will ask you to position this really sharp end between your eyes. So let's say, now that's right. So what I do now, I will start operations of the system, and Davis will try to capture the vibrations and the fears and the risks and everything he would be exposed to if he lived in a totalitarian space. So if he sees the signals early, he might be all right. He might not have a comfortable life, but he would be able to fit in. If he doesn't, the signals will keep arriving, eventually becoming your lethal, as for some members of the opposition and protest movement in Ireland. And that kind of ability to read signals is something that has been really operational for the system, which doesn't want us to look up. If I use that reference from the famous Hollywood movie, but if you look up, then you are in trouble. So how to embrace those fundamentals of what I figured in my book 2013, Can Russia Modernize, is the fact that regime has potential in the world through all kind of manipulation and patterns that we also use to contest and contrast. Use becomes really deadly on many levels. So what do we do in this situation? It's really how to get out in the street vis-a-vis that sort of activity. So I want to it. So I hope Sorry, this is a scenario that I worked out for myself. How to live with the system. So you have to frame the risks, the signals, the fears, then you articulate them or non-articulate them, but you know they're there, and then you cut them out, just like that. And then you put it, you know, this one is actually more by listening to performance, but I do one for Davis as well. And you know what I'm rolling, right? Because we are computer. Because you got your message from the system when you were on the there. And now that's your fear to burn.